Hello and welcome. You can probably hear the chanting is still going on. I think it's a recorded track. It's been the same on loop and repeat for I think a week now, if not two. All day, every day. I think it's from about 6 until about 9 at night. It varies. Sometimes there's some drums. You don't notice it actually. Like if you live near an airport or a railway station, or even church bells. You notice only when it goes off, like the fridge. They do have a fridge here actually, which if it was switched on, would be quite useful, maybe. Anyway, I digress. Welcome back to my kuti. It's been a bit damp and wet, so I've not been outside to talk to you. And I'm leaving the temple currently to the monks that live, the samaneras, the novice monks that live here. It seems if I am absent from the temple, they frequent it more often to do their style of chanting. So I'm very happy to leave them to that and not interrupt what is their norm. So you have to be content with this humble dwelling of mine for not such inspiring scenery, but hopefully with your comments that you usefully send in to me and questions, we can have together some inspiring dialogue. That's if I have the questions. Yes, here they are. So, moving straight on. With what might be quite a long answer. Just looking at this. Bhante, I find it challenging when I come across people who appear to lack compassion. How can I better navigate such situations? Some even criticize me for having too much compassion. Is there a point where one can be too compassionate? Thank you for your guidance. So I sense there, amidst the words of the question, there is some suffering. The subscriber is experiencing the suffering of experiencing others without compassion around her, and experiencing criticism of her own perhaps overly compassionate nature. Now there's no such thing as overly compassionate, but you get the sense that you're being criticized for being too compassionate. So let me reassure you firstly on that point, you cannot be too compassionate. We have 4 Brahma Viharas: metta, loving kindness; karuna, compassion, which is I think what we're going to be talking about today; mudita, which is joy for others. Mudita is a little bit like the reverse of compassion. Compassion is sympathy for other people's plight, misfortune, suffering, whereas mudita is sympathy or empathy, joy for others' happiness, success, pleasure, gain. And finally, upekkha, equanimity, which actually comes about as a result of the former 3, metta, karuna, mudita, and our practice of sila, samadhi, panya, meditation, moral virtue, meditation, and development of wholesome mind states, eradication of unwholesome mind states. I'll throw that one in right at the start there, as I always give it a mention in every talk, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, because this is our practice. As no doubt will come up, anicca, dukkha, anatta, the faculties or characteristics of our existence. It's not to be repetitive, it's because it is the answer, the way. It is Buddhism. It will reoccur in answers, in discussion to all topics, all questions, all comments. So where there is suffering, we need to understand what is suffering. The Buddha taught this. There's suffering, a cause of suffering, an end of suffering, and a path leading to the end of suffering. And the cause of suffering is, to sum it up, simply desire. Desire being that of wanting to have what we cannot have, or not wanting something we have, or not wanting something we do have, like for instance pain or negative emotions. Not wanting those is suffering. So it's still desire. In this situation where there is suffering, we need to look at, despite the overall context of the question being on compassion, we still need to identify where is the suffering coming from to arrive at the conclusive answers. The suffering, firstly, in the first statement is you're coming across people who appear to lack compassion. You're wanting others to have compassion. And they're clearly not having as much compassion as you do. This is desire. It's the desire for others to have something they're not having, and it's also the desire for you. So this in itself is unsatisfactory. This in itself is a cause of your suffering. When we see the cause of our suffering as desire, we can look at the desire and ascertain its reasonability. If we have the desire not to have pain, it's quite reasonable to be suffering as a result of that desire not to have pain. But when we recognize the desire not to have pain as being the secondary dimension to the suffering, it takes away a good part of the suffering, leaving us with just the pain as just that. I have pain, it's just that. I know I don't want pain, but why suffer more by agonizing over this, what is there? Rather understand the nature of the pain. Understand that it is anicca. Here we go. It is impermanent. Of course it is unsatisfactory, dukkha, but it is anatta. It is out of our control. Knowing these three characteristics of existence, we see pain as just that. Impermanent, of course unsatisfactory, but within anything to do with our bodies, out of our control. With that realization, the pain is not as bad as, oh, why do I have this pain? Please let this pain go away. And then ruminating, procrastinating, going on and on, papancha we call that in Pali, about the suffering you're having, the pain. So a second arrow to the wound. They call it the two arrows. One arrow is the pain, the second arrow is the suffering as a result of not wanting the pain. Not everybody is going to be as compassionate as you. How can I better navigate such situations? Exactly this way, positive navigation. Navigate away from such situations where you can. Where you can't, you accept that not everybody will be as compassionate as you. It could be as a result of a lack of sympathy, empathy, a lack of compassion that some people may have. There is an element in them of jealousy, maybe, And this is what provokes them to perhaps criticize you for being overly compassionate. However, if it is based on wisdom, in that, say for instance, somebody has very little and they give what they have to help the poor, then this could be wise criticism, because the individual could be giving away what they need to exist. So, overly compassion, there is an example. So, if you only have a certain income, the Buddha actually gave some good accountancy tips in terms of dana, and I think his percentage was governed at around 20%, something like that, of your disposable income, or your income, I think. But one should only ever use, in terms of giving, your disposable income. So you could use, say you have an income of, we'll just use round numbers, £100. You can quite happily use a third of that, let's say, for running your household expenses, a third of that for feeding and clothing your family, and a third of that may be disposable income, which you could spend on going to the cinema, you could spend it on chips and crisps and snacks and pizzas and thumbs up and Coca-Cola and biryani and pop music and pretty dresses and jewellery and perfume. No problem at all. Or you could say that some of that third, that disposable income, that if I did without of those luxuries I wouldn't die, I could give to a good cause. And this is really what the Buddha taught. He didn't say, take all of your... I'm very glad, I've just seen the little bird come in to my room and walk across there and walk back again. Sorry to interrupt. And this was happening last night, and in the dark, I thought it was a rat, because I never shut the doors and windows. I'm not so keen on rats coming in as I am little birds. Now I've seen the little bird, I know it's a little bird. And even if it is a rat, I'll still think it's a little bird. It's all about perception, you see. So having seen this very pretty little black bird wander in under the bed and now wander out again, I don't sleep on this bed, it's old furniture they store in the corner. So it likes to go under there. I sleep right here on the floor. Now I know it's not a rat, I'm of a better frame of mind all of a sudden. You see, this is how our minds trick us. If the rat had just walked in and gone under there, it would have given me a whole different perception of my day, even though nothing has changed. It's the same, what's been going on for the last, I don't know, 70 odd, 80 odd days that I've been here. It's just that only last night I don't sleep for very long, as you know, but I sat up for some reason to move something or get something, and I saw this creature going in and out like that, and in the darkness, because it's now the dark moon coming up, the new moon, there's no light, really much light around here, so it just looked like it. I assumed it could be a rat. Anyway, back to the point in question. I've lost the track a little bit now talking about that. So yes, they could criticize you for having too much compassion. Say for instance, if you went into the other 2/3, what you need to feed your family and yourself and what you need to pay the bills, then that's not being too compassionate. You can never have enough compassion. You can never be too metta. You have too much metta, too much loving kindness. You can never have too much karuna, too much compassion, or too much mudita, but you can use them unwisely. You can have unwise compassion. But that's unskillful use of your means, as opposed to, you can't use up compassion. It is a quality we have. So it's not a case of having too much compassion. Maybe some people's concern is your overuse of the resources you have, or the wrong use of the resources you have. Now, subscriber, please, I'm not necessarily talking about you in this. I'm just replying overall about criticism about people's compassion, because it is a very common question that comes up, a very common point for concern. So I'm generalizing as a whole. Sometimes people, or more often than not, it is purely criticism of your compassion because they have the inability to have the same compassion equal to you. So a little jealousy. That's the more usual reason, and very possibly in your case, the cause for their criticism. Now, in which case, in terms of this navigation, you just navigate away from it. If you can't, you just, okay, listen, hear what they say, and leave it. Let it go. Put it down. No need to grip onto it. No need to think about it. You know you're acting virtuously in accordance with Sila. You know you are developing compassion, you're developing loving kindness within that, and mudita. And this is giving you, establishing within you a quality of equanimity eventually. So you know you are doing good. So, on the final part of this question, is there a point where one can be too compassionate? I think actually I've just answered that. Of course, if you are overly compassionate outside of your means, then yes. But there is another problem. I think they've even got a term for it these days called, excuse me, sorry speaking into it like that, I was checking it was not fallen off. I don't like this term, but it's a term. I suppose it sums it up. Compassion fatigue. This is where, for instance, people get burnt out and overly exhausted as a result of being so compassionate. Now, this, I'm afraid, is not compassion. This is compassion. This is compassion with motive. I don't mean that in a nasty way, because we can very easily get carried away with doing good, with helping people, with being compassionate. And we can want to save all of the world. We can want to stop all of the problems. We can want to help everyone. And now this is very wholesome desire. Chanda is wholesome desire, as opposed to tanha, which is unwholesome desire, like thirst or craving. Chanda, wanting to help, give, be generous, is wholesome desire. But it becomes unwholesome desire if the desire to give becomes an overwhelming or an overtaking desire to get the satisfaction from giving. Not necessarily even to be seen to be giving, but still your own singular personal gratification you get from being generous, because we do get a lot from being generous. But it can be very easy, and it's a fine line between just giving and really getting a lot from giving back yourself, to the extent that that feeling overtakes the motive for giving in itself. Now, this is where this strange term of compassion fatigue can come in, because like all desire, it's self-fueling. So you get a good feeling from giving, so you want to give more, and you give a bit more, you get another good feeling, and the more good feelings we have, the more each time you need to get a little bit more of that good feeling for you to have that feeling at all, because you become immune to it slightly each time. So it gradually increases to an extent whereby you start giving and giving and giving overly so, and maybe going into those other 2/3 of what is required for you to exist. Money I'm talking about, or resources, time, it can be similarly applied to. This is where you might generate a little bit of a problem. But your over-enthusiasm could make you, as a fundraiser, go out and really reap in lots of extra money and contributions to help with your cause. So you become the agent, the middleman of compassion. No longer, though, are you working from compassion. You've created yourself a task, a role, a job, a fundraiser. And this is what they often refer to when they talk about this compassion fatigue. So you could take someone who's organised a huge event and continues to organise huge events over and over again to raise money for a particular cause. Eventually they burn out. This is because they've simply become, rather than a compassionate individual giving what they can, when they can, they've become an agent to giving. So they become the middleman. And this is hard work. That's not really compassion. That's not compassion in the nature of karuna, the Pali word. Compassion is having sympathy for other people's plight, misfortune, suffering, and helping as best you can. So I'll just quote a little Jesus story from Christianity here, because Jesus was having his feet anointed with some expensive perfumes or something like this. Possibly the gifts were given to him at his birth by the 3 wise men who came from the east, here in India, actually, is the real story, but we won't go into that. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We 3 kings, yes, 3 things. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I don't know what he did with the gold. The myrrh was used to preserve his body when he died, and incense or frankincense is a kind of a perfumey thing, I think. I think they were using this to anoint his feet. An expensive commodity of the time, and still is. And his feet were being anointed there by Mary. Not Mary, his mother, Mary Magdalene, his disciple, friend. And Judas, ironically enough, a very compassionate disciple of Jesus, and Jesus is considered one of the most compassionate of all teachers in history. So, along with the Buddha, of course, preceding him by 500 years. Him having his feet anointed in such a manner really did upset Judas, because he said, look, for this anointing oil and what have you on your feet could be sold, and this money could be given to the poor. And Jesus said one thing, one simple thing. He said, Judas, there will always be poor, but I will not always be among you. Now, that's quite a profound statement. It's also the truth. There will always be poor. This is the truth. Like, as the Buddha said, there is always suffering. Or there is suffering. Jesus was a man. He will not always be there with his compassion to teach and to lead his disciples. So he also needed looking after from time to time. Hence his feet, after walking many miles, were being massaged, anointed, whatever, with this particular oil. Of course, this oil could have been sold and distributed to the poor, but it wouldn't have gone very far in the context of things. But Judas, in his misguided or unwise, not overly compassionate way, but unwise compassion, criticized Jesus' actions or Mary's actions, thinking he could save the world with this little extra money. Now, ironically, he went on then to betray his teacher, but that's another story. But what he was saying there is, like with metta, karuna, you begin with yourself. If you don't look after yourself, you cannot look after others. This is what Jesus was saying, and this is what the Buddha says. We begin with ourselves, then we can help others. It's what the air hostess on the aeroplane says. Make sure you put the oxygen mask on you first before you try to help anyone else. Because if you don't, you will be unable to help anyone else. Even if there's a baby next to you, you need oxygen before you can get this mask and deal with the baby's oxygen. And it's the same principle. If we always remember this, bear this in mind, this is how the Buddha taught us to be compassionate, to firstly begin with ourselves. We even have an expression in the West, charity begins at home. You can bring that even more in to charity begins with yourself. Ensure that you're okay before you help others, because only then can you help others successfully. Otherwise your resources will be depleted and you will no longer be able to help. Now, like there will always be poor, there will always be suffering. With wars going on in the Ukraine and Russia, we think this is bad enough, and now wars are beginning and going on in Israel and surrounding areas. There are always wars. There is never a time in history when there is not wars going on in the world. We're in a very fortunate position in that for this generation, perhaps the next generation, I don't know whether you can say a generation and a half, but for more than one generation now, our experience is of no world war. Prior to our generation, our parents, our grandparents and ancestors' experiences was of world war, and prior to that, at least war of the world they knew, wherever they were. We've been freed from that for many years. We are experiencing, in fact, even amidst the wars that are going on in the world, we are experiencing overall in the world peace. In the majority of the world, peace. And having gratitude for that helps us understand where compassion should come from. Compassion needs to come from a basis of moral virtue and wisdom, sila and panya. Through our meditation, we can sit and we can bring these qualities into our minds of metta. We can bring into our minds karuna and mudita, developing equanimity and understanding of anicca, dukkha, anatta, enabling us to direct both our emotional, physical and financial resources in a well thought out and wise direction, using our resources carefully to maximize the benefit received as a result of our compassion. Equanimity, because without that there's a tendency, oh, another war, I must get my purse out and send some money. Oh, another starving person, I must feed them. This isn't equanimity, that is reaction. Equanimity ensures wise compassion, soberly thought out. Okay, I only have this much. This charity is a good organisation, or I can give directly to this cause, and that's what I'll do. If something comes along, another problem, don't be distracted. Continue supporting what you were supporting, the good cause you have chosen, because there will always be other things to come along and distract you. So Jesus wasn't distracted, he continued having his feet anointed, knowing that he needed to keep his feet in good order, to do all of the walking and teaching he was to do, much like the Buddha, whom would have been cared for from time to time. We need to look after our physical bodies as well as our emotional minds. And this is how we do it, through this practice of sila, samadhi, meditation, particularly samadhi and panya, particularly samadhi, because this is where we are able to just sit and do nothing and have compassion and metta for ourselves. Have the compassion to give ourselves time off from our duties, from our responsibilities, even from our emotions that are driving us, emotions that are driving us, to sit and let our mind settle and clear. So I think, let me see, better navigate situations, criticizing. I hope that explains or helps. It is a common dilemma. People can get very carried away with compassion because it is a very strong emotion once we have developed it. But we still need to keep the reins on it to ensure that it is wise compassion. Right, I don't know what time I started. Again, I say that every time, don't I? I'm enthusiastic to start talking, so I forget to look at the time. If there was a clock up there, it would be useful, wouldn't it? But I don't like to have clocks, they're not necessary. The sun is coming up, and it wasn't so bright when I started, so I'm guessing I've spoken for probably half an hour or so, in which case I'll ask another question. I'll look at one more question. Or should we leave it at that? I think we should leave it at that, compassion, today, because yesterday I spoke about pride. If you didn't get the opportunity to watch that yet, please do so, because it's not something that is usually discussed in Buddhism as a particular topic, and therefore quite a difficult topic to discuss. Or I found it difficult anyway. But hopefully I gave some ideas or my thoughts about the subject on pride. And today also, this subject of being too compassionate and compassion fatigue, to use this coined phrase, is also quite a complex area for discussion. So I think it deserves its own little platform, as did pride yesterday. So I'll leave it at that today, and if you have any concerns or questions, then I hope you can put them in the comments, or by all means send me an email. I'm always open to receiving emails. If you have anything you want to talk to me about privately, or don't feel you want to air in the public forum of the comments section here on YouTube, I'm not quite sure how you do get to that. I think you do that from the videos, but the email, you find my email address is in the description of all the videos, which is the same. It's just copied automatically to every video. I don't do individual descriptions, and the email address is there. It is englishbuddhistmonk@gmail.com. There, I won't air those questions in the public. If I do, it would be as a subject matter anonymously. Okay. Of course, the comments everybody can see anyway, so I answer those directly. I apologise I don't actually personally use your names because I don't know them. I don't really know their usernames, so they're sometimes just letters and numbers. They don't make sense. So I'm not sure who is always writing in when it comes to the comments. And I think it's just as appropriate, you know who, as the questioner, the subscriber, you know who's asked, you know you've asked the question, so you know it relates to your question. So I think that's, hopefully if there's something useful in there, you can use it and maybe share it with others if you think it might help them too. If those whom consider you too compassionate, maybe they can also learn something, or maybe not. Don't be overly enthusiastic about sharing the Dharma. It's more in practice. It's more beneficial to everybody if you practice the Dharma. because then people will ask the question. They will come to you. Whoa, why are you now so calm, so serene? Why are you so compassionate? Why do you have such equanimity? And you can say, because of the teachings of the Buddha. And then they will pick up the books. They will go to the YouTube. They will find out about Buddhism for themselves. And in this way, they will have far more benefit than you preaching to them from the soapbox, evangelical, proselytizing way, which we as Buddhist monks do not ever do. We're prohibited from doing. We just answer questions and comments. We try to teach by example, and this is by very far always the best way to show people how to do things. So if your compassion is well-founded and wise, and you are only giving what you can afford to give, if it's a case of giving or helping with time you have to spare, then people will never have just cause to criticize you. Only out of jealousy would they criticize you, which is something you can also be compassionate about towards them. Be compassionate for their suffering, that they cannot be as compassionate as you. So I shall leave it there. Thank you for watching.